Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hacking Open Source Business Podcast. Once again, I'm joined by co-host Avi. Avi, how are you doing today?
Hello. Doing good after a few weeks of travel for conferences. Finally back at home. Excited to be recording, and looking forward to this.
Yeah, Avi was at the Linux Member Summit, so Linux Foundation Member Summit. So, exciting! I did not go to that. But today we are joined by Ovais. Ovais, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here and great to be chatting with you again. It looks like Avi was not having fun with conferences because he was traveling, but I also attended 3 conferences in the last 3 weeks, but they happened to be in SF, so I probably didn't have to travel as much.
That doesn't count if you're just like going like across the street. I was at All Things Open, which is it's like down the street, right? So I know, that doesn't count because I don't get any airline points or hotel points, so it doesn't help my status.
Which conferences did you attend in the last couple weeks?
So I attended TechCrunch Disrupt, and then I was at XJS conference and Jamstack conference. Yeah, you were there as well.
I was at TechCrunch Disrupt for like a day and a half, just kind of checking it out. Yeah.
Oh, well, look at this. We can get like your conference recap. So compare notes live. Well, recorded, but live. Yeah. That's exciting. So what is TechCrunch Disrupt? I don't even know what that is. Tell us. Either one of you.
Ovais, you can do this one.
Well, this was my first time attending TechCrunch Disrupt, so I had a similar question as you, Matt, as what is this conference? And it was it was a really interesting conference that touched all the topics related to startups. So there were a lot of talks around different phases of startup, how to scale it, stories from different founders. Like there were stories from the Figma founder, from the Rippling founder. And then the startup battles where you get to see the startups pitch live, and you can see all the cool, interesting stuff that the startups are doing. One of the coolest one that I found was a startup that actually monitors the asteroids,
like going to crash into the Earth.
Not in the Earth, but that are going to crash into the satellite and can automatically, manual the satellite to avoid those objects. So that was pretty cool, very interesting. Yeah. So there was a lot of really interesting stuff over there. It was tech focused, but tech not just software, enterprise hardware tech, but tech across the board. Space tech, health tech, ed tech. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Avi, what did you think of it? Because you were both at the same conference and didn't even see each other. Didn't even know that each other was there. So what did you think?
I had no idea. I thought it was good. It's not the most relevant conference for us, for Scarf in particular, because we sell to a lot of other open source companies, developer tools companies, and there's just a really wide array of tech startups there. So, I mean, it's cool to see what people are working on and stuff, but it was, from my perspective, not the most useful one. But it wasn't one that I was planning to go to, but our banking provider, Mercury, actually just reached out to me like, "Do you want a free ticket to this?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." but
there you go. Right?
Yeah, but I think it's always good to network with other founders, and and so that from that perspective, it was a very enjoyable conference, and met some other folks that I've been talking to over email, and you see them in person, that kind of thing. So
I had also not planned to go, so it was my VC, General Catalyst, that I was a guest there. So yeah, similar story there. And I agree with you. If I look at it purely from community and business perspective, it was not super relevant from that side.
Well, you mentioned getting together with founders and getting together with other people. So what listeners might not know, because we haven't even announced it, so we'll do a live announcement now, is we're going to try to do some sort of get together in a couple of weeks in the Bay Area, December either 6th or 7th, probably the 7th. I'm thinking the 7th. Just kind of a meetup type thing where we're going to talk about open source and all kinds of fun stuff, get some pizza and beer, whatever, just to meet with one another. And since I'll be in the Bay Area that week, it'll be a great time. So if you're interested, check different channels for details, but we'd love to have you there. So, Ovais, you
That
should come.
sounds, yeah, I will definitely be there.
Sweet. Good.
Yes,
Yeah.
it will
Yeah.
definitely be there. You are going to be there. We're meeting you in person, and then getting to meet the other founders as well. Yeah.
So, for those who are listening, might not know, I've had Ovais on previous podcasts a couple of times. I used to work with Ovais while we were both at Percona. But many of you who are listening to this might be a little bit of a different audience. So, Ovais, can you give us a little bit about your background and tell us about Tigris, which is your company?
Sure. Yeah. So I have database, data infrastructure related background and infrastructure in general as well. So I've been doing databases and data infrastructure for more than 15 years at various companies before starting my own startup. And I'll get to what we are doing at Tigris. But before that, I was at Uber for close to 6 years. Prior to that, I was at another, startup, another smaller company, also doing infrastructure. Prior to that, I was at Percona, where I was working with Matt. So a lot of my career has gone into the database and infrastructure side of things. With regards to Tigris, so Tigris is a data infrastructure tools company. At Tigris, we are building a data platform for developers that makes it easy for them to build dynamic data-driven applications. So Tigris provides a multi-model, scalable, transactional database. It provides automatic indexing of data, so you don't need to do database administration operations. All your queries on any field are always fast. It provides search on the data in real time. And it really plugs well into the developer's workflow, as all interactions always happen inside the code. They don't have to step out of the application code and do manual DBA type of stuff.
And so, this is like, the goal of Tigris is the, developer data platform, if you will, or a platform that can take all of these different infrastructure components and provide them. Where did this idea come from?
This idea came from my time working as an application developer and working with application developers throughout my career. I think the most recent example would be at Uber. So at Uber, I was leading the storage infrastructure teams over there, and essentially I was responsible for database as a service in Uber's private cloud, so providing easy ways for developers to use databases, caches, eventing framework, so all the real-time data-related stuff. And just as the problem I've seen at other companies, I found similar problem at Uber as well, that not only offering a lot of choices makes it hard for the developers, and that's true for public cloud providers as well. If you look at AWS, you have 100 different database technologies that you can use. Which one to choose, when, what to use, what are the different characteristics of each of them. It's always challenging. And then the way these products are built out, you always have to choose multiple such products, and then you have to write data pipelines to stitch them together. And so you end up building your own data platform, and you end up doing that for each and every service that you are using, right? And this does not seem like a scalable approach, especially with the explosion and the number of applications that are getting built, and also in the what we are seeing, a decrease of infrastructure engineers or system engineers. How do we keep up from infrastructure perspective with making it easy for developers to build applications? So that's how I started thinking about the product. And at Uber, we were solving a similar problem. And the approach that we took there was to build an integrated platform. We called it TalkStore. There's a publication about it as well. But really, the crux here is, what does a developer need from a data perspective, and how can you provide that as a unified solution instead of asking them to build their own platforms every time?
So when you were first getting this project started, it seems like you started with Tigris as an open source platform.
Yeah.
Why did you make that decision? Was that from more of a marketing side of a thing? Was that more because you thought that would be the best way to drive developer adoption? Can you talk about how you came to that decision, or was that just the default thing for you? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah. So partly it is the default thing because I have built my career around open source and I have been using open source. Even at Uber, we were building off of open source solutions. You're not building things completely from scratch. So partly that is the reason. But the other reason is around. But there are several other reasons. One of the reasons is around adoption, as you mentioned, right? It's from an open source perspective. It makes it easy. It makes adoption easier. And the reasons it makes adoption easier is that, especially if you're building a new product, and open source kind of gives a level of transparency into the product that you're building and makes it easy for people to really understand what you're doing. From a business perspective, it gives them a safety net, especially if they're dealing with a startup that's building a brand new product. And then just from a community perspective, if you're saying that you're building a product for developers, then how do you take their input into account? How do you let them contribute? The way open source is the perfect mechanism for, not only getting feedback from people on the product that you have built, but actually taking contributions in and improving the product together. So it made natural sense for us. The other reason was that as part of the market research or discovery while starting the startup, I talked to a number of smaller companies and mid-sized enterprises as well. And one thing that was pretty clear is that there's a shift in how companies or enterprises are thinking about open source, and they kind of want the product to be open source. That seems like the default ask that we are not going to look into the product, we're not even going to adopt it if it's not open source.
I guess I'm curious. So if that's kind of the thinking, would there have been a huge difference, I guess, if you had chosen, say, one of the close to open source licenses, like if you had gone like the ethical use license or sustainable use license or all these other things? Did that thought ever cross your mind?
The thought did not cross my mind for multiple reasons. One of the reasons is that I find those licenses to be misleading. And I have myself being misled. And very recently, I was at this Jamstack conference. I looked at a very popular logging monitoring product, and I was told it's open source. And I was overjoyed that because the observability part of our stack is not yet open source. So I thought that, we are finally going to solve that. We're going to use this open source product. But once I started looking into it, it has a BSL license, which essentially means it is not open source, right? So I feel like these licenses are kind of misleading. And it is always best to, tell the truth to your user. And a better way, in my opinion, is to be open core, which is, when you say something is open source, it has to be open source. And the things that are not open source, they have to clearly be specified as not being open source. So I really like that, again, like I said, transparency for me was one of the key factors. So I really like that transparency from a license perspective as well.
But Ovais, you don't want to wait for 3 years to make that open source from a BSL perspective? You don't want to wait that long to get the observability? Why would you not want to wait? Come on.
That's the other thing, is that 3 years later it becomes open source. Who is going to use a product that has seen all those bugs that have accumulated over the 3 years and have not been fixed into the open source product? I mean, it's like giving a shitty version of the product.
That's right. I mean, it is, and I think that's really funny, because you're right, and we've talked about this before on this podcast about like the BSL and other licenses, and it's okay if you want to do that, but Tigris' strategy, and you produced several blogs on this, is to really tap into some of the power of open source. So your stack is really built around different open source technologies. It's not just all net new. So you've used Foundation DB, you've used TypeSense, you've used other components. How valuable was that for you to be able
So
to
much
kind of tap-
valuable. Exactly, so much valuable. Imagine writing a database from scratch and delivering it into a beta state in 9 months. There's no way anyone can do that, right? There's no way we could have done that. And we started in January, and then we had our first beta with some actual usage in September as well. The only way we were able to do that is because we are able to build on top of, Foundation DB, which is a really better tested at scale product that's available as open source, and we could actually use it and build a usable product on top of that. And similarly, TypeSense, which is another great piece of open source software that we use for indexing of the data. So we would not have been able to build a product ourselves if the open source components were not available.
Yeah, it's standing on the shoulders of giants, as some people said, right? I think that's part of the open source ecosystem, is being able to learn from one another and to help one another get better.
Yep.
And I think that really benefits everyone as a whole when we all collaborate to do that.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely.
Would love to hear about the kind of the story for how you got the first round of funding closed. What did so you said General Catalyst was the investor there. I guess, can you tell, were there certain metrics that they looked at during that? Was this purely like a more story-based pitch? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So there are two investors, the General Catalyst and Basis Set. And the story of getting the funding is actually not that straightforward. So, and it changed multiple times over the course of raising. So, I ended up creating 17 different iterations or versions of the deck that finally got me through the funding. And there was a lot of learning involved. So, coming from a technical background, I started off with a technical version of the deck, which was just talking about all the, interesting problems that the product is solving from a technical perspective. And of course, from a VC investor, and many of them are really technical, it doesn't matter, because you have to be solving a business problem, an actual use case, something that people need, right? And that's what you have to showcase. Right? So there was that learning that was involved. Because you were building this completely from scratch, so this is kind of different from other open source projects, where oftentimes what happens is that you have an open source project that's very successful, has a lot of different metrics that investors can look at, like stars, or contributors. We didn't have that because we were building from scratch. So there were no metrics to show at that point. What was to show was, the experience and what have we done in the past, and how people and how we are known in the industry. Those are the things. And then the other thing was around what product are we building, what problem are we trying to solve. So those were the two main important things that helped with the funding.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that a lot of open source developers go through when starting a business, is to get out of the habit of talking about the technical merits of what you're building, especially to investors at least. It doesn't matter. They just want to hear, how does this turn into $1 billion company, and why are you the right person to do it?
Yes, exactly. Those are the two questions. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a similar thing with marketing and positioning the product as well, that it's often not the technical merits, it's just talk about the problem that you're solving and what the value is. And I think it's a thing that a lot of engineers have to unlearn as they go.
Yeah. On the marketing side, though, I would say that if it's a developer-focused product, developers do want to know how it's built. So it's slightly different. Yes, we still need to talk about the problem that we are solving, how they're making their lives easier. But developers tend to be very curious. They want to understand how you built it. How is this thing supposed to work, right? And you have to do that as part of your marketing content.
Yeah, I think that's the whole developer-driven model now, right? Everybody's kind of chasing it. This is the whole rise of the DevRel movement, or the community first movement. It used to be that you could go out there and you could pitch the high level kind of, we're the better financial system for your, business, and you'll make all kinds of money if you use us. and now it's really more of that technical play of how does it make the individual person's job easier? How does it make them hit their goals quicker? And what kind of cool things could they do? I think it's really evolved and changed.
Yeah, it has. I completely agree. A lot of that, I think that some of the reasons are actually probably related to the way applications are architected these days. So in the past, you would have one architect, you would have monolith application, you would have an architect, all decisions go through that one person, right? But now you have a microservice architecture. Everyone writing that, like all the teams that are writing those microservices, I mean, there are so many architects, right? There are so many microservices, there are so many architects. So you really have to tell them the story, how you're going to solve it. So you have to do it in the bottoms-up way. You can't do it on the top-down way. So that is a fundamental shift. And this was actually true inside Uber for internal products as well. When you're building a product internally, we couldn't force people to use it. We have to show there's value, and then they're going to adopt it, and then they're going to use it.
You have to woo them. You have to make them comfortable. You have to speak their language. JavaScript and yes. You don't. Yes, I get it. So I mean, but that is a change that has happened over the last few years. There's lots of changes though, and as business evolves, what worked a couple years ago probably doesn't work now. And I think that's one of the things we're also seeing, is the market has changed not only from a developer perspective, but also from an investor perspective. Because when, Avi, you had got funding, Ovais, when you had got funding, the market was very different than it is now. And now we're seeing the Twitters and the Facebooks doing layoffs. We're seeing, a tightening economy. What have you seen, Ovais, in the short time that you've been looking at this and evaluating the last 6 months maybe? How has that changed for you?
Well, one thing for sure, I'm happy that I did the funding the time I did the funding. And I'm happy I did a healthy round. So yes, I mean, there is the market, you're right, is very different. I think that part of the tightening of, how investments are being done is, I think it's good, because then you really have companies that are actually solving a problem that come out, right? And you're not doing investments based on fluff, because there's a lot of cash lying around. So in some sense, it's a good thing. But of course, I mean, from a founder perspective, or someone running the company, you have to be more mindful of where you are spending money. You have to be more careful. You have to have a good understanding of what your burn looks like, and then you have to strategize how you're going to use your money. Those that becomes equally more important.
That's interesting that you mentioned burn, right? Because I can tell you, 12 months ago, everything was growth at all costs. You'll just get more money, right? It doesn't matter how much money you're spending. You'll get more. And I have heard CEOs be told by investors, we're giving you this money so you spend it. And we expect you to spend it in the next year or, something. That is completely and utterly changed now.
Yes, that has completely changed. That's definitely true. And growth at all cost mentality without having any idea of how I'm going to monetize the product, that's not how you run a sustainable business, right? So that was bound to change. On the other side, where it becomes interesting is that for certain products, growth is still very important. So for example, for DevTools product, it's still the growth part. Open source product growth part is still quite important, right? So you still have to focus on, but you have to have a balance, but you still have to think about, how I'm going to grow my user base, how I'm going to have more product adoption. So the growth angle is still there, but it's definitely, it's challenging now. You can't just focus on growth at all costs.
Definitely. So I'm curious at this stage with this much, time building this company under your belt, have you made any mistakes that you've learned from, or do you have any advice for other founders that are getting started right now? Whether that's in this current climate or just generally as an open source founder.
Yes, for the current climate, for sure, burn is important. So think about how you're going to burn the money, where the money is going to be spent, and always think about ROI. Whatever you are going to do, wherever you're going to spend your resources, what's the return on investment there, right? So be very clear about that. But also don't just focus on the market, because you have no control on what is going to happen in the market, right? No one is ever going to say that the market is going to recover. No one can tell for sure when the market is going to recover, or if it is going to recover. No one can say that, right?
Don't say that. So, don't say it's never going to recover, please.
I hope it recovers at some point. Yeah,
I hope the same thing. Yes, but I think that one thing that I would definitely advise related to this, this environment is that it could actually push you in a corner where you're just looking at, saving money. But that also is not a good way to build business, right? So you have to still think about what you are building, what product you're building, what's your product market fit story, what do your customers look like. But then you have to be intelligent about, how you make progress in the product. And you have to be more cash efficient, you have to be more efficient, but you still can't just sit in one corner and say that, I'm going to pause all the growth because of what market condition is. So that's definitely what I would say. That's what I am doing as well. So what I typically do I do keep the burn in mind, but the other things I do on my end is have scenarios in mind that what are the areas where we need to grow, and what's our burn going to look like if we, let's say that we have to grow in the developer marketing side, what's our burn going to look like based on the number of people that we're going to hire. So you still need to do those scenarios and do the math, and that is going to help you understand, where you can spend the money. So that's very important, because oftentimes you would just you wouldn't do the math, and you wouldn't know that if you can hire a really good engineer, as an example, then it's not going to affect your burn that much, but you'll be able to make much faster progress on the product, right? So having a good understanding of all the maths around the burn is important. Things that I have learned. So one of the things that I have learned is when I was previously, when I was really early at the stage and I was pitching the company, and one question that was very common is, what's your go-to-market strategy? And I would say that I will do a hybrid of top-down and bottoms-up. That's what I would say, because I didn't really understand how hard either one of them are, right? And when I still talk to other people, and I ask, and I just try to discuss with them about the go-to-market strategy, I get the same advice. They try to do a hybrid, try to do hybrid. But one thing I realize is that it's really hard to do hybrid, and you will not be able to do a good job with both of them if you go that way. So you
just
really
to clarify,
have,
Ovais, when you say top and bottom hybrid, you're talking pitching to developers as well as pitching to executives, like that's what you're talking?
Yes, so top-down sales motion, which would be, which would be involving more of the sales people, and, it would be pitching to executives, while bottoms approach is more on, adoption within the developers and building up the community and doing it that way. Yeah. So I would advise picking one that is relevant to the product. In my case, because it's a developer-focused product, because it's a DevTools product, it has to be bottoms up. And that's the most scalable and efficient way right now to show the value to the developer, have a big user base, have adoption, and then make them then use the power of the community as those developers go at other companies, and they can take your product with you In some other cases, it might make sense. For some other products, it would make sense to have a top-down motion. So it really depends. But pick one, and then just focus on one of the motions.
So what did you pick? What did you settle
Bottoms
on?
up.
Bottoms up.
Bottoms up.
Why was that the choice?
The reason, the choice, I mean, it was pretty clear this is the way to go, because the product is being sold to the developers. Developers are the one who will be making a decision. And even if, let's say that, I'm able to have a executive sign up for the product and get me a license, if the developer doesn't end up using it for, 3 months or so, the license is going to be gone, right? So you really have to show to the developer how it is making life easy. So you have to sell it to them, right? So that's why it makes sense to do a developer-led motion. From an open source perspective as well, it aligns really well. The bottoms-up motion aligns really well.
So, Ovais, with that, when you talk about that bottoms-up motion versus the top-down, there's so many companies that's going towards the developer-first approach, especially in this space. When you talk about like the open source infrastructure or any infrastructure space, let's be honest, you go to DB Engines, how many databases are there out there? There's a lot. And so when you're exploring building out Tigris and you have this idea, you have this concept, you start building the beta, how did you pick the differentiators? How did you come up with what you wanted to do that would make Tigris stand out?
The differentiator was very clear, because to me, all of these database companies were still trying to make a database. They were not thinking about solving the developer experience. So if you go to DB Engines, and I'll pick some names from there, Yugabyte, Scalable Postgres, PlannerScale, Scalable MySQL, CockroachDB, also talking about scaling Postgres. Is the issue with developer experience related to scale, or is it because of how developers have to, work with the rigidity of the database, right? So once you start looking at it that way, it's pretty clear that I couldn't find companies that are focusing on this problem, not from just, I've made the fastest possible query engine, or I've made the most scalable database, to actually, how do I make it easy to build an application that can interact with the data in an easy way without requiring operations. So once I start thinking about it that way, then it's clear that what we are doing is different than how others are approaching the product. So now it's a matter of how do we tell that story the right way so that we are differentiated properly, right?
So I'm going to be controversial. Controversy brings viewers, because that's what we're all about, right? Yes, look at Avi laugh, Ovais laugh. So, as we look at the differentiator, one of the ones that, I don't know if it's a differentiator anymore. It probably isn't. We talk about open source in general. Do developers even care about open source anymore? And especially in the cloud space, when developers are so used to going to an Amazon or an Azure and clicking a button and just having everything that they need, they get told that they're getting open source, and then they're like, okay, cool. I mean, it's almost like it's a checkbox in their mind, and it gives them like a nice blanket over their shoulders. This is nice and warm. But I don't know if they really care so much on how open source it is. And I think that speaks to a lot of what we started with when we talked about the licensing and the BSL and other types of licenses, where I think while you care deeply, Ovais, because you've been in the industry for a while, you know what this is. Do developers really care if it's open source anymore?
So there's a two-part answer to it.
I've stunned everyone.
It's a hard question. The first thing I would say is that developers require more education on what open source is. Not everyone is able to understand the difference between BSL versus Apache 2 versus some of the other licenses that are available, right? So there's definitely that there's more education needed, so there's a better understanding of what open source actually is. So just extending on that point, if BSL is promoted as open source, right, and developers don't have a good understanding of open source, the fact that they are adopting a BSL product doesn't, thinking it's open source doesn't mean they're adopting BSL. It just means that they need more, education, or we need to remove this, incorrect usage of the open source term. So that's one. The second thing is that I personally feel that developers do care about open source. As part of some of the surveys that we have done, we have seen open source has always been on the top requirements people have from the system. And then considering all the other alternatives that are coming up to these big three providers, I think part of the reason is because people want more control of their, you're talking about databases, more control of their data. The reason we are seeing more adoption of Postgres is because it's open source. The reason we are seeing more innovation happening around Postgres is because it's open source, right? So if you're using, for example, an open source database in one cloud, you are able to take your data. As long as it's really an open source product, you're able to take that data and you will be able to run your product, run your database in some other cloud with the same data. So this portability, open source still provides that portability, right? But so open source doesn't only mean that I have built a product that is open source, but it also means giving people control of their data. And this is where this is how we are thinking about it. So that's why the way we are thinking about how we are building the product is that we are making it so that you can install it and run it in your environment, because that's the way that you will have control of your data, right? So from an open source perspective, I feel like we are seeing trends that make it clear that people are still we're actually seeing trends to show that open source has become more important, especially as we have these three big players. You don't want to be tied to just them. You don't want that control over everything you're doing, right? So my thesis is that we will see more smaller cloud players coming up exactly for this reason, so that we don't have this centralization that's happening across three players. You'll have more decentralization.
Fair enough.
One thing that I've been relearning over and over as I build Scarf out is that pretty much every choice that you make has some trade-offs to it. There really is not a free lunch when it comes to business strategy. So I'm curious, when it comes to building your business on an open source product, what has been the biggest drawback to that choice, and how are you mitigating that drawback, if at all?
So the biggest drawback from open source product perspective is that because all the code is freely available, anyone can take it and build their own service around it, right? So from a business perspective, that's something of a challenge that you have to keep in mind. The other thing is that as you're building out the open source product and you're doing the development in the open, all your competitors are able to see what you're doing. And what we have seen, for example, is that some of the language that we use in our marketing, I see that duplicated over in some other places. Some of the features that we are adding, I see that duplicated over in some other places. So there's that challenge as well, that if you're doing everything in open, someone might want to replicate it. So those are two things that come to mind. For the first one, which is anyone can use your product and deploy it and provide a service on top of it. The way we have thought about it from a business perspective is to have an open core model, where the core of the system is going to be open source, and that's the way it is right now. Apache 2 license, and then features that are clearly marked as licensed in a different way. So that's the model that we are going to follow, and that's how I think that we can build a business around open source while still making sure that the community is part of it. And GitLab is a great example of, following that model in a successful way and the right way. So one of the things you would see with GitLab is that their licenses are very explicit. What is open source and what is not open source, or what has enterprise licenses. So they're very explicit about, very transparent about it. So that's what we will be doing as well. That's the business strategy. And apart from that, it's still early. We will see and learn and evolve accordingly.
Yeah. So I just realized that the most horrendously horrible thing has happened. Okay. I have gone an entire podcast without wearing a hat.
Oh. How could you do this to us?
I think this is the first podcast that I've gone through without a hat. So I think I'm going to have to put a hat on.
No, you should do it that way.
Just my normal hat. But I realized as I'm looking at myself on camera that I have no hat on. So
for the listener, Matt has a hat on now, so everything is okay, and everyone can relax.
I put the hat on. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see the hat go on, and it's the normal hat that I wear. But I have a lot of other hats behind me that I could have chosen. But
you
sorry.
have a great collection of hats. That much I can say. I
Do.
envy.
Yes. I'm actually. This is we're going off onto a little side tangent here, but I just got like hooks to hang hats on the wall, so I'm going to put a wall of nothing but hats behind it. It's going to be great. It will be epic.
I look forward to it.
Yes, you see, Avi looks forward to it. See,
I'm looking forward to it as well.
And all those in the open source space, if you're looking for a last minute Christmas gift for the Yonk, hats make a wonderful gift. I'm just saying.
You're looking right at me as you say that. Okay,
I wasn't looking at you. I was looking at Ovais. I was looking at the audience here. Yes. Well, since we are coming up to the holidays, what was that?
I'm saying now, Avi,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but no. This is random too. But since we're all here and we're all talking about open source and it is the holiday season, what is the one gift that you would give all the open source developers out there? What should you give them? It's a random question. It just popped into my head, but why not? If you're going to give the open source,
you're asking hard questions today.
I know, right? Like for the open source developer on your, like you wanna be nice to them. What are you going to give them? And yeah, obviously I joke about the hat, but that's not something that I would say is necessarily all that high on most people's list. But I'm curious, what is the it item for developers? Is it like a new keyboard? Is it a new camera? Most developers don't like cameras. Most developers aren't into that, right? So what is it going to be?
How about a hat?
Yes. I don't know. Like I'm curious. I am curious what the it item is for developers.
I mean, one thing that I will say, even though cameras might not be the most popular thing, having a good webcam, having a good mic is actually a really great thing for the open source developer, because a lot of the communication that you do is remote over Zoom, over calls like this, and you can connect with people a whole lot better when you come through clearly, I think.
Well, I could definitely relate to that. Our last podcast, Avi sounded like he was underwater the whole time because I brought a really crappy extra microphone for our live.
I was sitting right next to him.
He was sitting right next to me, but he sounds like he's calling in from the moon.
Yeah. So yeah, I think good AV equipment is very helpful and probably will make for more cohesive open source teams. So that would be my answer.
Okay, Ovais, is there one thing as an open source developer, if you're going to go work for code, that you would say should be on everyone's list of gifts?
Mechanical keyboard.
Mechanical keyboard, yeah.
Okay, wait, what? Which mechanical keyboard?
Which mechanical keyboard? There's one of the popular ones that
he's gonna Google it. He'll Google it.
No, I'm not Googling.
I will say personally, I'm a bit. Oh, I'm trying to pull it up in front of the camera here. It's kind of. I don't know. It's not going to work. I use the WASD Code, WASD Code keyboard. It's an excellent keyboard. Highly recommend. Not the cheapest one out there, but a very very solid mechanical keyboard. Lots of different switch types. Would recommend.
So I have the Logitech MX, which is not a mechanical keyboard, but it has the capability to actually do a mini KVM where you can flip between 3 machines.
Sorry, what is a KVM?
It's a mechanical, or it switches between different machines. So keyboard and mouse between different machines, and video. So keyboard, video, mouse, right? So this right here, okay, it actually has a button. You can kind of see like it says 1, 2, and 3. So I can flip between 3 different machines. So I actually have a MacBook. I've got a Windows, beefy machine that I do some editing on, and then I've got a Linux box, and I just hit the button and it just flips between them. And I have the mouse to match as well. But horrible design on this mouse. This is the same mouse. The button to switch is on the bottom. So there's this button right here that says 1, 2, 3. You have to click on that in order to flip the things. The keyboard's nice, not so much in the mouse.
Okay, so I just checked my Amazon history. It's going to be Logitech G915.
Oh, the Logitech G915. Okay. Yeah, so I think I actually might have the little brother of that around here. I collect hardware like, people collect, other things. I just have so much hardware around here. But very nice keyboard. I will say that, Ovais. I think
I'll have to take a look.
Yeah, the one other thing, the one other piece of advice on everyone's Christmas list should be a bigger monitor for everyone, right? As a developer, you could never have enough screen real estate.
That's true. Though I would say that I've been using 13-inch, just my MacBook screen.
No, you've been using just your 13-inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, here I'm going to say I think that lots of screen real estate overrated.
Okay.
I think that I would much rather hit Alt Tab or Command Tab or whatever your system is than move my neck to look at different parts of the screen.
As you talk to someone with 4 screens in front of them right now.
Oh yeah, I could never. I have one good monitor, and I used to do 2 monitor. I went back.
It also, I feel like it makes it easy to focus. And
you got your one thing. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can't talk to either of you anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is the last episode of this podcast. Thank you all for joining us. And
until Avi gets another screen. No, but all right. Well, I jest, but it's been great. But no, so everyone, sorry for the little off topic jaunt, but it's always good to hear what people value. Some people value more screen real estate. Other people value less. Everybody seems to value the nice keyboard. So for the developer on your list, a nice keyboard could work out pretty well for you all. But I do want to thank Ovais for hanging out with us and putting up with this discussion on, keyboards and videos and everything else because, hey, it's always fun. But Ovais, thanks for coming on.
It was fun to be here. Thanks for having me here. And I think we, I really enjoyed the chat and hope I provided some useful information as well.
Always, Ovais. Always. Don't worry about that. Yes. Avi, and thank you for coming and being on your little screen, too.
Oh, yes. Good chat as always. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us, and share with your friends. We are trying to share as much open source, love as possible, so your help is needed. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.